I'd like to talk to you a bit about solar thermal and the way that that could be a part of our future energy mix. I may interchangeably use the words concentrating solar power, CSP, or concentrating solar thermal, but they all mean the same thing, so I apologise if I mix them up. Electricity never used to be this difficult. It was never this much fun either. We used to burn a lot of coal. We had state-of-the-art coal-fired power stations at the time, and they're the ones that are being retired today. And we do a little bit of pumped hydro, a little bit of hydro up in the high country, and some renewables research. It was all very simple back then. And in 2000, we had the precursor to RET, the MRET, the Mandatory Renewable Energy Target. And in that, there was a target there for 20,000 gigawatt hours, 10,000 gigawatt hours of new renewable electricity. At the start of that, there was consternation in some quarters because obviously bioenergy was going to clean up because of all the cheap bagasse up in Queensland and northern New South Wales. In fact, by 2010, the majority of MRET had been met by wind, predominantly coming in through European turbine technology. Likewise, notwithstanding all of the incredible research in photovoltaics, and you heard Martin's talk just before the break, the PV industry got its fantastic kickstart through the various feed-in tariffs that were available to us, some maybe ludicrously high, but were available to most of Australia up until some years ago. And the PV industry excelled expectations there, really took off. So it often takes these little policy changes to instigate quite new technology developments in a new country. And I'd like to talk about how solar thermal could be one of the contenders for that energy mix. At the moment, we have quite a bit of coal-fired power, something like 60% still at the moment, with gas-fired generation coming on song now, despite gas prices. One of the attractions of CSP is that it can actually integrate nicely with the other thermal power sources, not just through the grid, but actually on site. And so that over time, I would see that even though we might have gas turbines operating on gas at the moment with some integration with solar thermal, we could over time see the level of gas dropping and the level of thermal energy storage integrated with the solar thermal plant increasing to increase that level of gigawatt hours coming out of solar. A little bit about how the technology works first of all. This is the Bright Source project over in California. It's one of 3 135 megawatt projects. It's steam generation. Just over the other side of the hills there is Las Vegas. This was a fantastic project that spans around about 2.5 kilometres in diameter. All of those heliostats, all of those mirrors on the ground are tracking the sun up onto the boiler, generating steam for a power block for a steam turbine, which is just very conventional technology. Likewise, looking at one of the main new recent developments in solar thermal has been the use of molten salt to enable storage. So we have a cold tank sitting at about 240 degrees. The salt looks a lot like water at that temperature, heated up to nearly 565 degrees Celsius. And that hot salt then flows back down to the hot tank, and that storage sits there as hot salt, ready to be available for steam generation into a steam turbine whenever you want it. The size of that tank can be increased anything from 4 hours up to 20 hours if necessary to give you the number of megawatt hours that you want out of that plant. Downstream of that tank though is just the conventional turbine technology. And it's being built all over the world. It started 25 years ago over here in the US. There's more than 2 million square metres of solar collectors that have been operating there in a commercial environment for that period. So it's very well known. More recently, Spain took off due to a royal decree over there, and they built about 2.4 gigawatts in a couple of years. Even more recently still, a number of other countries have now taken up the cudgel and are now building or developing these projects. From Morocco, Saudi Arabia, UAE, South Africa, Chile over here, Israel, India, and probably most importantly for us in China. China has actually set plans in place now to double the world's CSP installations by 2020. You see the question mark around Australia? That's not my question mark, that was already there, and it's probably appropriate. The pink represents just the research centre at Newcastle, but the green represent some projects that have been thought about, under development, not actually built yet. The blue one there is actually a project a bit closer to home though, just 6 hours up the road, Vast Solar, and they have a booth just out here. You can go and talk to them later on. Synchronised this project in January of this year. So it's undergone commissioning. They're now doing some fine tuning on the steam turbine network, but they've pushed the boundaries a bit. Instead of using molten salt, they're using sodium as the heat transfer fluid up in each of these receivers. In all of the countries that have built these plants though, the level of perceived risk has come down very, very quickly. And the same thing can happen here in Australia. Certainly the first couple of projects that we build here will be expensive, that's for sure. But very quickly, the electricians, the concreters, the boiler makers will sharpen their pencils and say, oh look, I built one of those before, now my cost this week is going to be 20% lower. So that cost could come down very, very quickly. The other part of the cost reduction curve though is R&D, not just learning by doing, but also the research that we conduct. This is quite critical. If we want to get down to figures like 6 cents per kilowatt hour, and that's the sort of area we need to get to, we need to have clear and precise metrics for each of the components that make up that system. So we have, for example, solar field needing to get the heliostats, those mirrors, down to $75 per square metre. We need temperatures above 650 degrees Celsius. We need power blocks of greater than 50% efficiency. We need storage with costs of less than $15 per kilowatt hour thermal. All of those things need to happen simultaneously. And that's the sort of research that is being carried out in Australia at the moment at places like our research centre at Newcastle. The solar field is really just a whole lot of mirrors accurately tracking the sun, so they aim halfway between the sun and the target. Now I have heard from some people that even though it's a very photogenic technology, it's very attractive, how are you going to get down to how are we going to make the dramatic cost reductions and keep pace with the sorts of cost reduction curves that you saw from Martin just in the previous talk? I mean, you've got mirrors, you've got a boiler, you've got a steam turbine. How are you going to make those dramatic cost reductions? Think about the advances in optics that have occurred over the last 5 to 10 years. Think about the advances in telemetry, in recognition technology, in drones, for example. We can adopt and adapt and refine each of those technologies from the other industries into CSP to make those disruptive cost reductions. Amazon is regarded as a disruptor. They didn't invent drones, but they're looking to disrupt their industry by using drones for parcel delivery. Will it happen? I don't know, but they've just simply taken technology from somewhere else. We can do the same here with concentrating solar power. At the other end of the system is the turbine. Typically today, the projects will be based on subcritical Rankine cycles, subcritical pressure steam turbines, around about 40% efficiency, very similar to the majority of our coal-fired power stations in Australia. That's not going to cut the mustard in the future. We're going to need to get up towards 50, maybe even 60% efficiency. And if we do that, then straight away there's a 20% cost reduction in the electricity that's produced. You've heard a lot about supercritical steam, advanced and ultra supercritical steam in the coal sector. But you see even supercritical steam only adds about 5 or 6 percentage points onto subcritical steam turbine technology. We're actually aiming to develop the supercritical CO2 Brayton cycle. Very similar to a steam turbine cycle, except it's using CO2 as the working fluid in a supercritical condition, and the efficiencies there are getting up to above 50%, and in a combined supercritical CO2 cycle, up towards 60%. Importantly though, at doing this at temperatures of only about 700 to 800 degrees C, instead of the 1300 degrees C that you would need for the air-based combined cycles of today. And here's an example of how that cost reduction could come about. Typical steam turbines, very large, quite clunky machines. The supercritical CO2 machines, because of the very high density of the working fluid, much smaller in footprint and therefore much lower in cost as well. A lot of this research is being advanced through an organisation called ASTRI, the Australian Solar Thermal Research Institute, supported by ARENA and with a number of universities and overseas partners. Just quickly like to finish off on the real value of CSP, and that's storage. There's no way that CSP is going to get down to the 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour of photovoltaics. But if you look at the case of storage and you think about a CSP case with thermal storage versus a case of PV plus batteries, the net present value of the CSP thermal storage is a lot better than the net present value of the PV plus battery case. In fact, if you think about the dollars under the zero curve there as representing a cost that the taxpayer would have to foot in order to get to a highly reliable grid, look at that triangle for the CSP case versus the triangle for the PV battery case. The volume of that triangle, i.e. the dollars spent in getting the technology up and running, is a lot less for CSP than it is for PV batteries. Some work in California has shown that the value of CSP is some $50 to $60 per megawatt hour greater than just the case for electron generation alone with no storage. That means that CSP doesn't need to get down to 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour. In fact, it can aim for costs 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour greater, still be very cost effective in the market. There's not enough of a storage signal at the moment, but by 2025 I think we're going to be wishing that we had spent some time developing up these storage technologies. So thank you for your time and happy to take any questions.